Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess I wanted to ask Sai, what is his position on free will?
Just one second, sorry. Yeah, my position on free will is not a biblical doctrine.
All right.
This is how I explain it to people. I say there's a difference between free will and free choice. Now, if people define free will in making choices according to our natures, I don't have a problem with that. But over and over, scripture says that our wills are in bondage to our natures. And this is how I explain to people. I have the nature of a man, so I'm free to get out of this chair and start walking. I don't have the nature of a bird, so I'm not free to flap my arms and fly away. And according to scripture, our wills are in bondage to our natures. And it says that we are dead in our trespasses and sins. And the dead do not have the ability to choose life. And that's why I say Christ must first bring us to life so that we freely choose, to get. This is how I explain, like it's sort of like we're drowning in a lake, and Christ, or not like we're drowning, like we're dead at the bottom of the lake. Christ raises us to life, so we freely choose to get into the rescue boat. So that's an analogy that I use to try and explain that we do have free choices, but it's according to our natures. The dead can only choose deadly things, and you have to be brought alive to be able to choose freely according to your new nature. And if people ask me that, I have verse after verse, I think 20 different verses that describe that our wills are in bondage to our natures.
I mean, the idea of libertarian free will that I'm thinking of is you have the ability to choose otherwise. Like if you're choosing between A or B, you always have the ability to choose A or B. No matter if this in the same situation. If we rewound like the history of the world and started over again, you have the choice to choose B over A no matter what.
Is that your view?
So that's what I understand to be libertarian free will. I don't have that view now.
No, the thing is, what I tell people too is Romans 8, verse 7 and 8. The mind governed by the flesh is hostile to God. It does not submit to God's law, nor can it do so. Those who are in the realm of the flesh cannot please God. I mean, I got tons of verses that reflect our inability to do so. However, those Christians who believe in libertarian free will, I ask them, did you choose Jesus Christ? And they say, yes, I did. I say, did that please him? And they say, yes, it did. And I say, well, according to Romans 8, 7 and 8, you can't please God if you're in the flesh. So it's just incompatible with logic and with scripture.
Does God have free will?
I would say that God can freely choose within his nature. So, I mean, he can't do that without outside of his nature. So it just depends on how you describe it. Sometimes free will is too broad of a definition, but I would believe God is definitely free.
Well, again, like free will, he has the ability to choose otherwise. So could God choose not to create, this universe?
Well, I think, especially when we talk with God, it's really difficult to talk about choosing and choosing otherwise, because I believe that puts God in a realm of time. Because then you would have to say that there was a time where God had not yet chosen, and then there becomes a time when God has chosen. And that puts God in a realm of time. And so I think when it comes to a choice made by God, that's wholly incomprehensible to the average man. So, I would have difficulty trying to put it into like God chose this way in that he had the opportunity to do otherwise. Could God have created the world otherwise? Sure. But once he's done it, he's bound by that choice. God is bound by his nature.
How do you describe any action of God then? I mean, it seems to me any type of action described is taken with respect to temporality.
Right. I say we are temporal, God is not. There is some mystery involved. So when it comes to me, like I make free choices according to me, I am in time, God isn't. This is a question that I ask people, people who disagree with this position. I say, did God know prior to creating somebody if they would end up in heaven or if they would end up in hell? We are in time. God is not in time, but we are in time. And God deals with this realm where we are in time. Does God know if I'm going to end up in heaven or if I'm going to end up in hell? So yes, he does. So I say, since God knows that, let's say person B will end up in hell, are they free to choose Christ and end up in heaven? And these are people that are in time. And I just don't see how logically they can reconcile God knowing that something will take place and yet something else can be the case. I say that's a logical contradiction.
Well, wait a minute. Because he's outside of time, he can't have knowledge about
No,
what
no,
people
no.
do in
Let me
time.
explain it again.
Okay.
Person A and person B. This is the question that I ask all Christians. Does God know where they're going to end up? Now, the open theist will say no, and that's a heretical position. But even the Arminian will say, yes, God knows where they will end up. I say, so if God knows that person B will end up in hell before he creates them, then it's certain in advance that person B will end up in hell. And that's fair. That's a fair logical statement, isn't it? And then I'll ask that same Arminian, if God knows for sure that person B will end up in hell, are they free to choose Christ and end up in heaven? And they'll say yes. And I say, well, that's a logical contradiction. That's logically incompatible. If God knows that person B will end up in hell, they will end up in hell. And of course, then the people say, well, why evangelize? Why pray? Why preach? If God knows in advance where people are going to end up. And this is how I answer them. I say, does God know if I'm going to have a full stomach tonight? Sure, he does. It does not make sense then to say, why eat? Because God is a God of means. God accomplishes his ends through means.
Yeah, but how can he talk about how he performs any
What is your
actions
position,
if
by the way?
I'm an atheist? But
Oh,
I'm concerned. I was concerned about his activity, right? Like
no, the thing
if
is, these are questions that are internal among the Christian worldview. The problem is that in the atheistic worldview, you can't account for free choice.
But I'm asking you about what's happening in your
Yeah,
worldview,
I know,
and
but
I agree
that's
with you
irrelevant.
actually.
I'm saying that you can't even get into this discussion unless you assume God. These are
Is it
internal questions for
irrelevant?
Christians. Pardon me?
But you would have an answer if I was
I was
speaking to
giving
you
you
as
answers,
a Christian.
yes.
Okay, but I mean, if I ask further questions,
Right.
um, is that okay if I continue doing that?
Well, the thing is, I would say you need to convert. Here's the scenario that I give to people. Let's say that you are drowning in a lake. You're an atheist, and somebody comes out with a rescue boat, and I'm saying get in the boat, and you're saying, well, I want to know what is that's a Evinrude? Is that an Evinrude or a Johnson you got on the back of your boat? You know, I'm not crazy about that pinstriping. I'm saying get in the boat. I say if you want to have these discussions, that's fine. We can do them as a Christian, but that's not your issue. Your issue is that you can't make sense of anything unless you start with God. So we can have this discussion, but for me, it's just a waste of time. You're wasting my time and your time.
Well,
You need to get in
imagine
the boat.
if it happens to be the case that, I'm wrong about anything, but I point out something that's incoherent in your worldview, it wouldn't be a
No, but
waste of
here's the
time.
problem. You can't have a problem with incoherence in an atheistic worldview.
Well, it's not a problem for me though. It would be a problem for you if I pointed out
It's
something
not a problem for
incoherent.
me. I don't have a
If
problem
something's
with it.
incoherent with your worldview?
I'm saying it's not incoherent.
Well, yeah, but
If
if
okay, let me
something
put it
was
this way:
pointed out, that would be a problem for you. Sorry, go
if
ahead. Go
anyone
ahead.
can have a problem with incoherence, it would be me.
Yeah.
But I don't have a problem with it because I say it is coherent. But when you raise an objection of incoherence, you're appealing to absolute laws of logic that you can't justify without God. So what you're
Yeah.
doing is actually borrowing from my worldview to critique my worldview.
How do you justify the laws of logic?
The laws of logic reflect the thinking of God. God is universal. He's not made of matter. He does not change. Logic is universal. It's not made of matter. It does not change. Logic reflects the thinking of God. That's how I justify the laws of logic. And I'm asking atheists how they justify them without God.
Well, I don't know if that justification works out
Well,
though.
that's fair. You can disagree with it, but what's yours?
Well, the problem is I assume that logic works. I agree with like William Lane Craig, for example, that there's no ontological like origins of logic. The laws of logic, for example, are necessarily true.
Okay,
But
so logic just is.
I don't know. I guess you can kind of call it
Okay,
that.
God
In
just
all
is.
possible
Who's next?
worlds, logic holds. But the thing about what you just said, it sounds to me like you're trying to derive. Are you saying we should be logical because God is logical?
Right. It says, be ye imitators of God, Ephesians 5, verse 1.
So because God is logical, we ought to follow his laws of logic then.
Ephesians 5, verse 1, be ye imitators of God. Yes, that's right.
That you're trying to derive a not from an is right there.
There are oughts in it, it's a command. That's an ought. Be ye imitators of God is an ought. That's not an is. That's an ought.
Well, you're saying God is logical,
Right.
right?
And we're
And
told in
so,
scripture to be like God, to imitate him.
yeah, so we ought to be like God
Right.
because he is logical. You're deriving not from an is.
What's wrong with that?
Well,
Yeah,
one of the
I
things
don't
is
see the problem.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that for anything. I mean, having
Look,
it's also referred to as like Hume's dictum. It's also
here's the
referred to as a
problem.
naturalistic fallacy. It's like,
When
oh, it's our nature to do this way, so we ought to act this way.
hang on a second. When we're commanded in Scripture how to behave, that is an ought. Now, the problem is the is ought fallacy, the naturalistic fallacy, is not a fallacy for Christians. We can derive oughts from God commanding us to do things to live a certain way. The is ought fallacy is a problem for you because you can't get any oughts in an atheistic worldview because there is no one giving commands.
So if someone said it's our nature to, live like savages and
Right.
not use like like toiletries, all that kind of stuff, treat people barbaric and everything. So we ought to act that way. He's not using fallacious. He's not using a fallacious argument.
Well, there is no ought because there's no command. There's no like on what basis? How do you get the ought from a situation like that?
Well,
Because there has to be a
because
command.
that is our nature.
So what?
Well, I mean, I can. The whole point is that I can say the same thing about God and the laws of logic. So what?
So what about
Just
what?
because God is logical, I don't see how that justifies we ought to like follow his view of
Well,
logic.
you.
Certainly not if it's the case that fallacious arguments can be written, right?
But the thing is, of the two of us, I can justify laws of logic. You can't.
No,
So
but I just showed you that the way you've justified it is a fallacious
okay,
argument.
let's get right down to the basics then. Do you believe in the concept of truth?
What kind of truth? What do you mean?
Truth. Do you believe in truth?
Yeah, but what I'm asking, what's your definition of truth? Because there's a
No, no.
couple
I'm
different
asking
ones.
you if you believe in truth. Oh, I'll be happy to define truth according to my worldview. But do you believe in truth?
I think that you can have concepts of truth like
Okay. How do you
uppercase
define
T and
truth?
lowercase t.
How do you
Truth
define?
is, I mean, you could say that it's something that corresponds with reality or coheres,
Okay,
conflates
great.
with
So
the
how do you know
concrete
what's real?
reality. I guess I'm not really, I take it as an assumption that I exist. I take it as an assumption that my cognitive faculties are
Right,
reliable.
right. But so you could be wrong.
Sure.
So you don't know what's real, and truth is that was real. Therefore, you can't know what is true, and therefore you're not in this discussion.
No, I take it as an assumption. I don't think that you could justify it without either being fallacious, like how you were earlier with
But you can't
justifying
make
the
sense of
laws of
fallacies if
logic.
you don't know what's real.
Well, I mean, if that's the case, fine, but I'm pointing out to you that you have that problem.
No, but the thing is, you can't point that out to me because you don't know what's real.
Well, I mean, me being like incoherent about my worldview doesn't mean that the problem with your worldview I pointed out isn't still a problem. It's still a
I'll
problem,
let the
right?
viewers decide that. Is there anybody else?